Welcome, my friends, to a city built on 7 hills, like Rome itself. In a moment you are going to see the most important of the 7, the Citadel Hill. It's all great and fantastic, but I had no idea who came up with that 7 hills. It's not 7. Amman is built on 77 hills. The city is huge. Just entering the center takes 1.5 to 2 hours. That's pretty much what we're doing right now. We're going towards the center, and well, in a second you're gonna see, my guess is 70% of Amman. Hills are everywhere, with buildings built everywhere possible without any previous plan or anything. There was space, you build a house, and then you hope for the best. Now the streets are in the valleys. Fortunately, the roads are pretty wide and well designed, so it's all great. But I imagine what you're seeing is 70% of Amman, because those 4 million people have to live somewhere, right? Yeah, you heard right. 4 million is Amman alone, and the greater metropolitan area, 6 million. So more than half of this country lives in Amman and the surroundings. And here's the thing, when you take the Levant, so Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, we're thinking, oh yeah, important cities, Beirut, Damascus, Tel Aviv, I'm not even mentioning Jerusalem. Amman is by far the biggest of them all, and it's always kind of forgotten, shown on the side. So we are going to do Amman justice this time. We are going to spend several episodes talking about the city, the surroundings, and plenty of interesting topics connected to it. We thought that in order to do it justice, the best way is to walk around it. And because we read everywhere and we're told by everybody there's horrible traffic, we decided to stay in the very center, or to be specific, in the downtown area, because there's no actual center in the European sense. So we decided to focus on one of the highlights. And here's our hotel room. Hotel is simple, pretty cheap, but the view is the Roman theater, one of the highlights of Amman, and the hotel is the white building right there. This is the view from the theater. It kind of felt for us like it's the natural center, because I think the only bigger square is in front of the theater. So we were pretty happy and pretty lucky with the choice. We are going to soon walk around the place properly, and I'm gonna show you and tell you in more detail about everywhere that you see. But we love museums, so let's start in a bit of a different way. We are going to leave the downtown area and go to one of those copy-paste neighborhoods. Now this is actually in many places an idea which I find very interesting, that if you have a poor neighborhood, you don't simply pour money into it. You build something which may bring economical benefit to the neighborhood, but maybe even more important, it brings, let's call it, dignity to the people who live there. So in this supposedly very poor neighborhood, you will find the most important museum of the country, the Jordan Museum itself. And as museum nerds, this is the first place we are going to visit. Here we are going to spend a substantial amount of time, because second of all, if you would like to talk about history of today's Jordanian lands, well, as you can see, you can start 15,000 years ago. But first of all, let's start from the very beginning. And that's the first hall you see. It is modern, interactive. So let's start, well, interactively. Straight up, first topic, water. Here Vicky is trying out how many liters you spend on basic necessities at home. Some of it quite a lot, as you can see. And this is it. This is not my obsession. Water is the obsession of Jordan. And no wonder, you have one of the driest countries in the world. Their neighbors as well, but Jordan is unlucky, having hardly any coast, so the other countries can desalinate seawater. Jordan cannot, as there's hardly any sea to desalinate here. So for example, In the museum they show you an invention by a local professor of kind of a condensator. It gets humidity out of air during the night, and then the sun heats the condensator, humidity becomes water. That's what you're seeing right now. Hopefully that will help them, but saving water also helps. Here's Jordan against the Gulf states, how many liters per person is used. But let's leave the water topic aside for now, because it's as deep as the ocean, so to speak. So more interactive things. Here, for example, as in the ancient times, Vicky is preparing a silver sheet with some hieroglyphic inscriptions. It's a lot of fun as well, but our favorite interactive part is powering a city. And finally, some statistics. More than 50% of the population, when it comes to education below secondary, 7% are still illiterate, so there is space for improvement here. But there's plenty of space for improvement as the population is very young, more than 50% below 24. And that's because the families are big, 5.4 persons per family, although used to be more. And now my favorite statistic. No commentary here. So, that part was educational and fun. Turns out though, on the first floor, something even better. There's a temporary exhibition called 1001 Inventions. And it is about the golden age of Islam 1000 years ago. So that number has more than one meaning here. And I'm very glad that it's here, because today the stereotype, and I'm sorry to say, kinda well deserved, is that Islam and science don't mix very well. But it used to be very different. 1000 years ago, Islam not only preserved the knowledge of ancient Greeks and Romans, but they would combine it also with knowledge from modern India, coming up with some amazing inventions, some of them even being basis for modernity. So we're very happy that there is an exhibition about the topic, and more so that it's very interactive. It is super colorful, because our guess is it's mostly aimed at kids. But we are big kids. So here, for example, I'm gonna send a guy into space.
T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Lift off.
So that was a lot of fun, and I thought I should send Vicky into space as well, as what you see here, the thing, the rocket, whatever it is, they prepared it on the side. So Vicky, being very brave, enters it, and nothing happens. It's not working, but she's not giving up. She tries to fly herself. Unfortunately, that doesn't work too well either. So, obviously, we are not meant for flying. Anyway, our favorite part was something else. You had important people played by actors who were talking about their biographical background, who they are, how they came up with what they came up with. And what you need to do is pick up kind of a phone, and you can hear it, you can also read it, see it. It is, in the end, as mentioned, interactive. The fun part is when you don't pick up the phone, because then they are trying to convince you to do it. And that was by far our favorite part of the whole exhibition, just watching the actors having a lot of fun and being extra silly. Now, unfortunately, because our schedule was rather tight, we did not have time to listen to all of them. But let me tell you this, we were so impressed that later, traveling, when meeting locals, especially if they had children, we were telling them all they have to go to the museum with their kids and show them the exhibition, that they will love it. So, last thing, let me show you our favorite actor. No commentary, you may simply hear Vicky from time to time giggling at the actor's silliness. So that was fun, but if you think that's it, nope. We fortunately found a place where you could actually dress up. So of course, it's our time to get silly. We dressed up, and here is proof. But fun is over, it is time to get serious. The museum, the city and its surroundings are very good background to introduce the history of modern Jordanian lands, especially the western part. And there is plenty to talk about because, for example, we can begin with the Neolithic Revolution. Here you have two sickles. The one on the left is roughly 12,000 years old, the one on the right only 4,000. And one of those Neolithic cultures lived in what today is called Ain Ghazal. So it's a neighborhood in northeastern Amman, but roughly 10,000 years ago there was some kind of a Neolithic settlement there. So what was found in Ain Ghazal were statues, and those are till the very day the oldest in the world large representations of humans. When I say large, not small figurines, but a meter and a bit. So pretty much human-like, you can say, and they are absolutely incredible. Now you may say, yeah, kind of simplistic. They are 10,000 years old. 10,000 years old. You may be shrugging your shoulders now, but I find it absolutely fascinating. Seriously, if there's nothing else in the museum, I can leave now happy. Of course, we won't leave the museum, especially that some statues are very particular. Obviously, twins were born in Neolithic times as well. Unfortunately, about the culture, it's after all 10,000 years old, we know nothing. So let's fast forward several thousand years and we come to historical times. 5,000 years ago, influences of the Egypt of the pharaohs are very strong, as evident here, and very often Jordanian lands would be in Egyptian hands, so Egyptian influences are no surprise. What may be a surprise are the megaliths. You would think more of Europe, the menhir, the dolmens. There are supposedly still hundreds around Jordan, although some of them are endangered by urbanization, so they are transferred, for example, to the entrance to the museum itself. Here it is. Now, the real fun part begins a bit more than 3,000 years ago, end of the Bronze, beginning of the Iron Age, or, let's put it differently, the biblical times. So let's say the historical part of the Old Testament. Now the background is, a bit more than 3,000 years ago, Egypt is failing, and in the Near East, for example in modern Jordan, you have new little kingdoms. And if we look at the Jordanian map of today, starting from the south, you will have Kingdom of Edom, then Moab, and where we are right now is the Kingdom of Ammon. Yes, the name of the city of today has very ancient roots, and the capital was Rabat Ammon, which is the Citadel Hill. Actually, from those times, hardly anything is left, but the fundaments of the walls that you see on top of the Citadel Hill, they are made by ancient Ammonites. I know some of you think of something different right now, but Ammonites, well, the people of Ammon. Now, what's the main source of knowledge? They are mentioned more than 100 times in the Old Testament. For example, the famous King David, when he fell in love with Bathsheba, she had a husband, a general of his army. So David sent him against Ammon. He conquered the whole kingdom, but while trying to take the hill that you're seeing, he got killed. And King David has a full kingdom in his hands and a new wife. Lucky him. So that's an example of a story from the Old Testament, and that's the main source, as there's pretty much nothing else. Most of the things we have from those times, as you can see, are ceramics. Although some of it, I have to say, is pretty cute. My favorite example, here's a proper pilgrim flask. And people were coming to Rabat Ammon for pilgrimage because probably there would be the main temple. Now who you see is Ashtarte. She was a very popular goddess in the Near East, but the main god here was Milcom, but we haven't found any statues of him. Fortunately, what you're seeing right now are some inscriptions in Ammonite language, and Milcom appears in it, hence we know. Also, because of those inscriptions, we can tell that Ammonite was a very similar language to, for example, Old Hebrew. They could probably understand each other pretty well. Now let's have some royalty. Right hand clenched in a fist, left hand holding a lotus flower. Such depiction of royalty comes from Egypt, but this one is definitely an Ammonite king, although he wasn't independent anymore. In the meantime, the Levant was taken over by the Assyrian Empire, so that king was a vassal of them. And then Babylonian Empire, and then the Persian Empire, and then finally Alexander the Great. And after his death, his generals started creating new empires. Hellenistic times begin. In the meantime, you noticed that we're out of Amman. The best example of Hellenistic times is roughly 1 hour to the west. There's a little village which has Gasr al-Abd, a Hellenistic villa. Now actually around that villa there was supposed to be a little pond. So there is no pond, but let's listen for a moment. So, considering the sounds, a pond here would make sense, right? Anyway, that's according to modern reconstructions how the villa should look like, and this is how it does. So actually, it looks pretty good. It does give us the sense of the wealth of the owners of the place, although it's only the ground floor. The first floor did not survive, as you can see, and we are going to visit it a bit more, but let me use it as a background to an interesting little detail. We very often tend to think through kind of modern nations, as in there's a country, so there's one nation there. But here, for thousands of years, it was more like layers. The newcomers were another layer, and the old people did not disappear. Great example, the family that built the villa were the Tobiads. Official information, Ammonites. I found info, Jewish. So you may ask, one or the other? Well, how about both? Ammon usually appears in the Old Testament as a rival, but think of them more as the frenemy of the Jewish kingdoms, and probably the best example, the only wife of the famous King Solomon that's mentioned by name in the Old Testament who bore him a son was an Ammonite, and many prophets actually were angry that plenty of Jews take wives from Ammon. Anyway, think of the Tobiad family as kind of a mix of both, as people did mix here for hundreds of years. And if that's not enough, the name of the founder of the villa was Hyrcanus. It's a Greek name, so probably the family had mixed Ammonite Jewish heritage, but they were Hellenized. And the architecture of the villa pretty much proves it. Anyway, the villa probably was not even finished. The lands around modern Amman were kinda unlucky, as they were at the border of two Hellenistic empires, Seleucids and Ptolemies, who loved fighting each other. So probably the villa, because of all the wars, was never finished. That's why all the modern reconstructions that we have are of plans, the ideas they had, but the villas probably never finished. Last look at the panther. Water should be flowing from its mouth, a lion here and there, and let's go back to Amman, now to the very top of the Citadel Hill. And let me tell you a bit more about the fighting between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, because originally the Citadel Hill, modern Amman, was in Seleucid hands, but eventually it's the Ptolemies from modern Egypt who claimed it, Ptolemy II to be exact, and he had a nickname, Philadelphos, so he kinda established the city again, but gave it a new name after himself, Philadelphia, which is in the end the most important legacy of Hellenistic times here, cause everything that you see now, that's not Hellenistic anymore. After 200 years of war, everybody was happy when Pax Romana arrived. So everything that you see in terms of ancient times on top of the Citadel Hill is actually Roman. Actually, to be honest, not much is left. There's pretty much this gate, so to speak. That's what's left of the Temple of Hercules, but even if it's not too much, as you can see on the photos, it is very picturesque. but this is how, according to modern reconstructions, it would look like back in the day. But let's go back to the idea of layers. This is a Roman Philadelphia city, which is on top of the old Ammonite capital. So if this is the place where you have Temple of Hercules, the main god of Philadelphia, we can safely assume before here was the Temple of Milcom, the main god of the Ammonites. Very possible that it was pretty much a copy of the Temple of Solomon that used to stand in Jerusalem. Now you may say, okay, we don't want any Milcom or Telecom, we want Hercules. This is what's left. But imagine, if those three fingers are already so big, how amazingly huge the statue of Hercules must have been. Well, it didn't survive, and unfortunately the temple did not survive either. But have I mentioned that this kind of gate is super picturesque? It is. Anyway, let's follow the example of famous Daedalus and let's fly down to downtown Amman, to what probably used to be the Forum Romanum, the center of Roman Philadelphia, and for us it is pretty much till the very day a natural center of the city. So there's a bit of a columnade here, which is nice and cute, but the most impressive piece of Roman Philadelphia is the Roman theater just around the corner. And it is huge, it is impressive, used to sit 6,000 people and in the shade. It is built into a hill in such a way that you're in the shade pretty much all the time. Here's a bit of sun only as we came in the afternoon. But now let's go up, up, up to have a better view still, but you have to be careful. It is rather steep, 2,000 years old after all. And you may slip easily, although some people don't mind. And at the top, the views are of course still impressive, but still more important, imagine you could sit here and still hear the actors on the stage. Acoustics are absolutely amazing. So when it comes to acoustics, one extra thing in a moment. Now, when it comes to Citadel Hill, there were monumental stairs leading down from the Temple of Hercules all the way down. The stairs don't exist, our stairs are less monumental, but definitely slippery, so slowly, and the sitting area, like typically in Roman theaters, is kind of a half circle. We're gonna have an acoustic experiment. Vicky will be on one end, I'm gonna be on another, we're gonna talk to each other and see what happens. So concentrate now. You may hear Vicky as sounding like a ghost.
Głośniej, głośniej, bo nie słyszę. No, wiem, że mnie słyszałaś, ja też cię słyszę. No, wiem. Idealnie, nie? Nawet bardzo dobrze cię słyszę.
Did you get it? If not, don't worry, there's actually a better place for that experiment. Let's leave the Roman theater behind and let's go to something right next to it, Odeon. So, to make it short, it's a theater, but only for the elites. You can see it is much smaller. You can see perfectly now this horseshoe shape, and you will see the experiment again, but I think you will see and hear much better than previously.
Jeszcze raz.
Jeszcze raz coś.
Ale dobrze słychać.
Yeah, this is how we roll. But wait a second, Temple of Hercules again in the background? Well, it is picturesque, and we're back to the citadel, because next historical step is the Byzantine Empire, and in front of you are remains from the 6th century. Actually, Eastern Roman Empire it should be called. I like the topic very much, but Amman is not the best place for it, so we're gonna talk about it later on in another episode. Here, just a little detail, this probably was the Cathedral of Philadelphia in the 6th century. So let's close it off with a little Byzantine mosaic, and next step, and you will think, of course, time for Islamic conquest? Not really. Let's go this time east 1 hour to a place called Halabat. It is one of those highlights outside of Amman. You can do a full day trip around desert castles in the east. Ironically, most of them are actually not castles. Doesn't matter. For us, they will be very useful for a number of topics. And one of the highlights of the desert castles is Halabat exactly. But first, map of the 6th century, Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantine only in brackets, very good. But here suddenly some Ghassanids appear. They came from modern Yemen, roughly in the 4th century. We don't know whether they were Christian already or they became Christian when they arrived here. What we know for sure, in the 6th century, during, from our point of view, Byzantine times already, they had a big super rival, the Sassanid Persian Empire, and what used to be the Roman limes arabicus, Byzantine Empire cannot hold it on their own anymore. So they started using Arab tribes, and Ghassanids were the biggest, as so-called federati. So they gave them pretty much the lands of southern Levant of today. The building in front of you looks like a fort because it was a typical fort of Limes Arabicus. It's a square with 4 towers. Now Ghassanids were given Limes Arabicus so that they protected from both the Persians and incursions by the Bedouin, but they would turn such forts into either monasteries, where after all they were Christians by then, or into palaces. How do we know? Roman forts did not have pretty mosaics, so it must have been a Ghassanid palace. You'll see a couple of extra examples from the museum, but here's the important bit. Before, there were of course plenty of Semitic people living in the Levant, but for example, cities were heavily Hellenized and the political power was somewhere else. Now you have the Ghassanids, a fully Arabic culture which has full rule over a given territory. The cities get Arabized. There's Arabic court culture now. Officially, they were under the Byzantines. The Greek language is present, but here you have an edict by a Byzantine emperor used for building. So this is key to understanding why Islam could not only conquer but hold Levant so quickly and so strongly, because we tend to say Islam conquered Byzantine Empire lands. Well, not exactly. Those were more than 100 years Ghassanid lands, heavily Arabized or re-Arabized, however you call it. Now, mind you, the Ghassanids were, along the Byzantines, defending themselves, but eventually conquered. They were not conquered by foreigners, like, for example, Sassanid Persians. They were conquered by cousins. So that's one thing. And another, Islam coming here, they don't need to create tools, for example, for the court. Ghassanids created court, city culture, which was already fully Arabic for more than 100 years. And during Islamic times, also Ghassanids remain an important piece of the local puzzle. There's one more extra important issue. We're not going to discuss it now, but Ghassanids will come back in the future, but keep them in mind as kind of a forgotten piece of the historical chain here. In the meantime, as you noticed, we walked around the ruins and they are very pretty because you've got limestone and basalt, white and black, the combination of those two types of stones symbolically combining the local desert. It's all fine and dandy, but that's not how they would see it. They would see it rather like this. Of course, everything was plastered and there were plenty of intricate details, and let me show you some of them. It is all in stone and I have to say it is rather pretty. Now, before we finish, of course, an obligatory photo of how it used to be back in the day. So let's thank the archaeologists and their local collaborators that it is in the state that it is today. But now let's move to a different spot, which is kinda absurdly positioned. There is the industrial zone of Amman. Here you have entrance to the airport, yes, and what you have right next to them is another of the desert castles. Yep, it is 2 kilometers away from the airport, which is kinda cute. Qasr al-Mshatta. If you'd like, you're waiting for the plane, maybe you can just run and have a quick look, I don't know. Anyway, the important bit here is, when you approach the what used to be the main gate, there's actually some very pretty work in stone, and you're thinking, wow, well, this is actually not wow, it used to be wow, but 100 years ago, the lands of the Ottoman Empire here, and one of the Ottoman sultans wanted to send a little gift to his friend in Berlin, Wilhelm II, Emperor of Germany. So everything here was dismantled, and it's now in one of the museums in Berlin. So, a minute of silence. But in the meantime, also a good example why people call those places desert castles. Because what you see now, it looks like remains of towers. And yes, but those towers were not for defense, they were representative, as the building in front of you wasn't a castle, it was a palace. And if you have any doubts, have a look at the gate. Now you would have such palaces because the caliphs who lived in Damascus would come here to meet leaders of the local Bedouin tribes. Now why would you do that? One idea is that the caliphs also simply wanted to escape from Damascus, and it was a good excuse to come here and meet the chiefs of the Bedouin. But there's a second theory. This is actually not the idea of the caliphs, but they borrowed the idea from the Ghassanids. So that would be one of the examples of their influence on the early Muslim Arab rulers. Which one is true? Difficult to say. What we know for sure, here would be the throne room. Would be. But the palace was never finished for two reasons, and both coming in a minute or two. Before we leave the place, let me show you another throne room. A place where even the caliphs have to walk on their own feet. So there was the big official throne room, and there was the unofficial little throne room. In other words, simply a toilet. You may be thinking where, but excuse me, it is a very important place for all of us. So with this interesting quality of life detail, let's go back again to the Amman citadel, and let's have a look for a second again at the remains of the Byzantine cathedral, because we're leaving it behind, and there's a building with a blue dome, which is an interesting symbolical thing, because when we're leaving behind the Byzantine cathedral, we're leaving behind Philadelphia. It is during the Arab times that they reverted to the name Amman, which actually shows you that many people who lived here must have been Ammonite or basically Semitic. The name Amman was not forgotten, and it was reverted to during the times of the first proper caliphate, the Umayyads. They were ruling from Damascus, half of the world, which for Amman is not bad at all. Here are, well, really remains of what used to be the main mosque of the Umayyad times, and there's gonna be nice a representative gate to the place with the blue dome, which is a palace pretty much like we saw a minute ago. Such palaces were not only built in the desert, they were also built in cities, which shows you two things: that Amman is still important. Well, it's not far from Damascus, but here the palace was not to meet Bedouin leaders, it was to show the city who the new ruler is. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody becomes Muslim straight up. And actually, from what I learned, for several hundred years, majority in cities in the Levant were still Christian. But this is a thing we're going to talk about within several episodes. Now, here's a scandal. Probably that dome never existed. The blue dome was added in the 90s. And when I say probably never existed, we actually do not know, because two important events in the middle of the 8th century. First and foremost, a huge devastating earthquake. And get used to it, most of the ruins, especially of cities or palaces that you're gonna see, that's the middle of the 8th century earthquake. And if that wasn't enough, there was also a lot of fighting for power, and the Umayyad dynasty collapsed. A new dynasty, the Abbasids, came to power. And one of the first things they did, they moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, very far away. When they went away to Baghdad, power and money and influence went with them. Those two things combined, politics and earthquake, pretty much shattered the lands of modern Jordan, and many of the cities in that time lost importance. Amman was still kinda there. The wall that you see is from the time of the second dynasty, the Abbasids, and it is still kinda meaningful during the third dynasty, Fatimids, who for a change ruled from Cairo. So those three first dynasties are represented by colors on the Jordanian flag, so they're kinda easy to remember. And here's an ironical twist. Then come the Crusades, and the ironical twist is that suddenly the land here becomes very important. It is contested by the Christian and the Muslim world. And the first time, again an ironical twist, that you have the name Transjordan, that there's a country here. There was a vassal state of Kingdom of Jerusalem called Ultra-Jourdain. I'm butchering French right now, I'm sorry, but it literally means Transjordan. You're probably thinking I'm showing you a Crusader castle right now. Nope, if there was a castle here, there are no remains. So what you're seeing are still the remains of the 8th century Umayyad palace. Anyway, the story of the Crusaders is going to also appear later on. Actually, not really only Crusaders. There's also the famous Salah ad-Din, and his story will be there as well, because, well, maybe because he simply won against the Crusaders and he started another dynasty, Ayyubids. They also ruled from Cairo, and they quickly fall to the Mamluks, who also rule from Cairo. And there's also very little today from their time in Amman, which pretty much starts getting forgotten. So finally I can use Europa Universalis. Now, the game begins in the middle of the 15th century. Modern Jordanian lands are in the hands of the Mamluks. Aqaba, Man, Karak and Ajlun, also Azraq, which is part of Fadl Confederation, under the Mamluks. You might have noticed Amman simply does not appear anymore. It's not important, and the last straw for pretty much all of Transjordan, beginning of the 16th century, Ottoman Empire took over, and the whole region becomes a backwater of the Ottomans. There's pretty much nothing going on here. Amman itself is a ruin. Only the local Bedouin, all the farmers sometimes stay in the ruins. And still, middle of the 19th century, that's the Roman theater and its surroundings. And it is here, the late 19th century, when we finish our historical introduction. Now I know it was long and tough, but it is going to be very useful in the future. And also, here we're going to finish our episode, so the next episode will be Amman as such. We're going to walk around and enjoy it. Think of this basically as a film. Now there's going to be a commercial break in the middle of the film, and we are going to come back very soon. So actually not a big goodbye, just a little detail that maybe you're not expecting of Amman. And now we're having our commercial break. Don't go too far. I'm gonna see you very, very soon. Bye bye.